Hello, I'm Ruth Slavid, and in today's Architecture Today Shuko webinar, we're delighted to be featuring 3 award-winning facade projects. First of all, let's hear from Schueco UK's Commercial Director, Sean Butler, who can tell us more.
Welcome to the latest in our series of 80 Schuko webinars. In today's webinar, we will explore the ideas and technical solutions behind 3 award-winning projects that triumphed in our 2020 Schuko Excellence Awards run in partnership with Architecture Today. Each of the designs depended upon an integrated approach to structural and environmental performance to create efficient and sustainable exteriors to the buildings. But all 3 projects that we will hear about today had their own unique challenges, and each required a different and distinct approach to deliver the final successful solution for the facade. At Schuko, we believe sustainability means designing, constructing and operating a property in such a way that it's ecologically, economically and socially future-proof. I think today's presentations and discussions will raise many crucial issues for all those interested in the challenges of the future and our ability to employ resources and materials in a reliable yet ecologically and economically sensible way. Today also marks the launch of the 2021 Excellence Awards, but more about that and how to enter after the presentation. Thank you once again for joining us. I'll now pass you back to Ruth, who's chairing today's event.
Thank you, Sean. After the presentations and the Q&A, we will tell you more about how you can enter the 2021 Excellence Awards. But before we do that, let's hear more about today's 3 projects from the judges. And also we will get a brief reminder of the 2020 online awards ceremony that was presented by Charlie Luxton.
In their 7th year, the Schuko Excellence Awards, this is what everyone's after, are firmly established in the architectural calendar. And despite of the disruption caused by the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, the Schuko Awards 2020 attracted a wide range of high caliber projects from practices both large and small. And this year's Cultural Building Award winner is the Fratry.
I thought that this building was really incredibly rich, and it managed to blend, when you're working with an existing building and, such a powerful existing building as well, how do you provide an extension that works and it harmonizes with that, but still is distinctly of its time? It was playful, it was respectful, but it had its own presence.
The winner of the Commercial Building Award is 50 to 60 Station Road, Cambridge by Grimshaw Architects working with specialist contractor Dane Architectural Systems Holdings Limited.
The technical prowess and the reinvention of a system by the trade contractor was really ingenious and really demonstrated a really strong collaboration between the design team and the contractors.
The overall winner of the Schuko Excellent Awards 2020 is English National Ballet in London.
I think generally facades need to resolve a wide range of many sort of complex and often contradictory performance requirements. What I think this project did was just to distill all those down into a very elegant technical proposition, which was then very expertly executed.
Hello, this is Charlie Luxton. I'm phoning about the Schuko Overall Award that you've just won.
Fantastic.
Well, I can tell. How does it feel?
It feels absolutely fantastic.
And how will you be celebrating? I know it's difficult in these times, but how will you be celebrating?
I'm thinking I may have a little pot noodle in the office now, maybe, and a little baked bucket.
that set the scene for us. And we will have full details about how to enter this year's Shuko Excellence Awards later. And there'll also be ample time for Q&A after we've heard our 3 presentations. So at any time when you're listening to and watching the presentations, if a question occurs to you, do press the question button and send it in. And we will be having presentations from Daniel Mulligan, Director of Glen Howells Architects, who will take us through the overall winning project, the English National Ballet. We will also have a presentation from Paolo Vimercati, who is Principal at Grimshaw, and he will give us an insight into his 50 to 60 Station Road project in Cambridge, which won the Commercial Building Award. But first of all, we're going to hear from Ingrid Petit, who's Associate at Feilden Fowles, and she's going to talk about the Fratry at Carlisle Cathedral, which won the Cultural Building Award. Ingrid, over to you.
Thank you. So today I will present you the Fratry project, which we worked on with Carlisle Cathedral. And this project started by an invited competition in May 2014. So we've been working on it for 7 years, and I've been project architect on it since the start. This is just showing you a picture of the completed building. It completed in June 2021, despite COVID, just right on time for the reopening of cafes on the 4th of July, I think it was. But when we first went to the site, when we first visited the site, it was very different to how we've just left it. So the Fratry building, which is here on the left, is a grade 1 listed building. It's scheduled monument as well. And it's basically facing the cathedral, which is where I'm currently standing taking the photo. The Fratry building was kind of separated from the cathedral by a tarmac road, and it had this kind of quite dark porch, which was added to the building by G Street. In terms of the brief given by the cathedral, the key thing was to bring a new wheelchair accessible entrance to the Fratry. I will show you a section in a moment, but this porch made the access to the existing building really difficult. And as a result, the Fratry building was barely open to the public, especially the hall at first floor, which was difficult to access. In the undercroft, there was a cafe, but that wasn't a wheelchair accessible space. So that was our main brief. In addition to this, there was a need for new facilities, toilets, a space to welcome and orientate visitors, and a space for cafe and catering to replace the existing space in the undercroft. There was also a brief for the existing building to improve the existing fabric, to make the existing building into a multi-use space for interpretation and for education, to kind of bring school groups or families for workshops. So as I said, the key element of the brief was this difficulty in access. So as you can see, this is ground level, so that's where you stand in the landscape. But the building is 1.7 meters higher than the ground floor for the hall and 1.7 meters lower for the undercroft. When G Street added the porch, he actually reversed, like kind of flipped and lowered the door, the original door, and kind of added this set of steps, which were fairly difficult to negotiate, given that there were kind of steps as you open the door. So it was really kind of easy to fall or trip as you entered the building. And that's why the cathedral, as a consequence, decided not to make this building open to the public. And therefore, this was a key element to our brief. So here you can see kind of how the door had been reversed. I'm standing to the outside of the building, and you can see how stripped out the relief of the doors are. And that is because by being flipped, all the external reliefs are now, well, were before in the inside of the building. It wasn't always obvious where we would make a new connection or a new access to the existing building. We started by looking at the statement of significance. So in red are all the kind of elements of the fabric which are of the highest significance, so almost like you cannot touch. In orange, it's medium significance. So here you can see the porch, because it was added as a later date, it's of a lesser significance than the rest of the fabric. And in blue is all kind of what's been added over time and is of no significance. You can see the problem where there was not much in the external fabric, which was blue, or there's actually nothing that is blue. So there was no points, no entry points of kind of obvious category. So we had to work with the orange. And again, the porch became the kind of most logical position, because obviously there was already an opening. It's something that didn't quite work, and it gave access at the right kind of points in the existing spaces. These kind of openings were a bit awkward in terms of the internal layout, because they would give access onto the stage for the hall. We also briefly looked at options at the back of the building, but again, there's a change of level here. You can see a few steps, and there's also a really difficult corridor to negotiate. So we decided to look at how to extend where the porch is located. So that's just an aerial view again, as found, and you can see again this tarmac road which desiccated the precinct. You see the Fratry on one side and the Cathedral on the other side. And it's always something that I found quite weird. It's just like the lack of relationship between the two buildings, and the fact that that tarmac road kind of encouraged people to rush past the Cathedral without even realizing where they were kind of passing. And looking at the history of the site, we realized that actually the Cathedral used to be way longer than currently. All of this was demolished during the Reformation. But in addition of being longer, there was an actual cloister which was formed by two other buildings, so the West Range and the kind of chapter house, and the Fratry, which formed this kind of cloister and this relation between the Fratry and the Cathedral. So we found this kind of quite interesting, because actually there used to be a space to pause between the two buildings. Here you see one of the engraving, which again, you've got the Fratry here, the Cathedral here, which illustrate this relationship now lost between the Fratry and the Cathedral. So we were really keen to see how we could interrupt this tarmac road and kind of recreate a space between the two buildings, a space where people could pause, could realize where they were entering, could realize the importance of the site they were traversing. So we started a lot of massing tests, starting from kind of a massing, which was a building all along the north elevation, but it felt kind of quite apologetic. It also felt quite impactful on the Fratry and on the existing kind of fabric, potentially undermining the foundations of the existing building. We therefore started looking at other options, kind of turning the building 90 degrees from the existing building, and started modulating the heights of the different buildings to create a circulation kind of link tower and a pavilion for the welcome facilities. This kind of developed into this site plan, which kind of shows this new courtyard now between the Cathedral and the Fratry. So we've got this pavilion. The plan is really simple. I will present it in a second. And then a link, which is basically a set of stairs and a platform lift, which gives access to the undercroft and to the Fratry Hall. So finding the right expression for the elevation was one of the key challenges for the project. We started working on a rectilinear, really modern kind of elevation, try to work on different sizes for the columns. And then when this was presented to the locals, it was hated, and they felt it looked out of place. It was not really relating to anything in the precinct. So we started working on arches, firstly round arches and then dropped arches, and looked at how the rectilinear frame could form a leading edge with the dropped arches in the background. This kind of geometry came from another read of the site. And so obviously the site has got a lot of arches, and we modeled the proportion of the proposed elevation onto the existing west window of the Fratry. And here you can see kind of how this has been executed with the kind of linear, rectilinear leading edge of the frame, and then the arches in the background. Towards the end of this presentation, I will touch really quickly on the detailing of it. But just moving on the plan, as I said, it's a really simple plan, a kind of big open area for the cafe and welcome space, and then all the services at the back with a small kitchen and then a set of toilets. There's then the linking building with the platform lift and 2 sets of stairs. I've put here some photos of the inside. The internal walls have been rendered in lime plaster, which is pigmented to kind of match or complement the stone on the outside. And here you can see the section showing the stairs kind of leading to a mezzanine floor, which gives a new view towards the cathedral before entering the hall. And then the other set of stairs going down to the undercroft. What I really like is how now, so the door, we've managed to reverse and raise again. I've mentioned at the start of our presentation that it had been flipped and lowered when G Street added the porch. It was key to us to give access to bring it back to its original level. And once we were doing that, we thought, well, we might as well put it back to its original position. And I love the view now you get from the cafe towards the door. Which is then framed within the circulation space, which is a bronze structure with curtain walling, giving you extensive views to the outside towards the cathedral. And then turning back, you've got this view towards the cafe downstairs. And here you can see how kind of the door has been removed from its original location and then reversed. We were lucky that as the work had been done a first time, there was a relieving arch over the doorway, which allowed us to prop the wall whilst the works was done. I mean, I could go on for ages about all the works and the craft of the stonemason, but here you can see a picture of the door being reversed. It was an amazing thing to see. In terms of the existing spaces, our brief was really to clear the space, kind of refresh them. There used to be a lot of like screens, a kitchen and so on. So really what we did in there was just to kind of refresh the spaces and remove any clutter. So that's the whole how it is now. And there's some oak joinery sitting along the edge. We've kind of revarnished the floors, cleaned the wall, remove a temporary screen. And this will now be used for events, conferences and exhibitions. Here again, you can see the view back towards the cafe. And similarly on the undercroft, it was a similar kind of approach with just the addition of a small block of toilets, given that the space will be used for school groups. So they've got toilets directly accessible from this space. Again, kind of clean finishes and then joinery along the walls for benching. Yeah, just quickly finishing on the stone and the elevation. It was amazing to kind of see the first one-to-one mock-up done on site. There was obviously a lot of design development at the early stages, but it all came to life when we came to site and Kirby, the main contractor, had commissioned this one-to-one mock-up for any final comments before erection on site. So you can see it's solid stone, 500 mil deep. It's a local stone called Local Bricks. We decided on this stone because it's got a complementary color to the existing stone, but also you can just about to see here, there's some kind of darker veins on the stone, which we thought would be interesting to follow the arch curvature. Here is the stone being installed. It's all self-supporting and is just restrained back to the steel structure, which is the structure spanning the pavilion. So again, here is the detail. So you see the solid stone and then the structure here, and you just got like steel brackets which restrain the stone back to its structure, similar in section. And here you see one of the other challenges in terms of the glazing. You've got the stone with steel windows kind of meeting then the curtain walling with the bronze structure. So there was a lot of development on that, a lot of attention to detail given here to kind of keep the clean lines, really slim lines of the glazing, and it to work with our bespoke bronze structure on the inside. So here you can see some completed photos with obviously the Fratry and the Cathedral in the background. It's been incredible to see it opening over the summer. It's just a shame that obviously due to lockdown, it's not been the smoothest opening. But yeah, it's been settling really well and the client has been really happy with it. Great, thank you very much. That's all for now.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. It was great to see that project. It was also great to see your office again, which I have visited in the past. And what an insight that was, especially into the use of stone. Now, our next presentation is by Paolo Vimercati, Principal at Grimshaw.
Thank you, and thank you for having me at this presentation. And I'm happy to present the building we have finished recently in Cambridge. 56 Station Road is a speculative office building we built for Brookgate, which is a local developer that acquired the rights to developing the CB1 master plan around the Station Road area, just outside the city centre of Cambridge. I wanted to start this by a planning journey because, as I'm sure most of you know, some of these projects have a long gestation period. And this building in particular was the highlight or the centerpiece of the master plan. Here you could spot the station, which is a listed building in Cambridge, to the right-hand side. And this is the cornerstone, it's the kind of the biggest building within the master plan, reaching about 16,000 meters square and for full height of 34 meters, which in Cambridge is quite high. So it took quite a while to get to a planning resolution, and I'm going to quickly highlight that. As you can see here in plan, it's the largest building in the area. The site in front is a hotel, which is outside the master plan, that's why it's not drawn. And as a conception, it was a large flow plate building, but that did not cut the planning expectation from the council for such a delicate renovation area of the city. So it took quite a while and quite a few planning iteration and appeals to get to a buildable consent. So this project has been part of my life for quite a long time, which is in equal measure exciting and stressing. It's good memories now. And as I said, as being the cornerstone of the master plan, the aspiration was that the building as a single element would be the highest point along Station Road, which is a kind of boulevard axial to the station going into the city center. And as a first move, which is the drawing that you see at the bottom of the page, we're starting to kind of articulate the massing of the building to create a better rhythm into this progression to the high point. And we highlighted this with two key views, one looking towards the station. The building here is on the right-hand side, and you see this articulation in two distinct volumes to emphasize the high point on the eastern corner. And the reverse view, which again, it will have a building onto Station Square in front of it. And we already, from this very early conceptual sketches, which remain throughout all this planning process, highlighted the corner towards the station, which is on the eastern side, northeastern side, as an articulated element, inspired a bit by the Art Deco building around the 1930s, if you remember, the Odeon cinemas and the Metropolitan Line station, which are quite iconic pieces of architecture in our minds. And this is an end result. As you can see, there's a site in front of it being developed now. It's well out of the ground at the moment. This is when our building was just finished, where so it gives you an idea of where we got to as a finished product. But as I said, that took a while. So we started with submission in 2011, and I'm going to scroll through this as a showcase of attempts of convincing the council in good, positive, and challenging at the same time discussion to arrive at a resolution for the right balance of development area, development value, and civic presence and civic purpose. So the buildings did not really change its conception, but it did go through a lot of iteration to appease a number of complaints and requirements from the local community, the local stakeholders, and the city. And ultimately, this is a rendered image from the more private side to the south of the building, where there's a new, small, more kind of civic and quiet public square away from the main road. And the building, again here, very distinctly developed in two masses to engage with that corner in as positive way as we could. Now, in summary, this process went from a building that was two distinct volumes with a common plinth to a building that is a unified floor plate all the way through from ground to the top, although each floor plate has a slightly different floor plate or perimeter, and a clear distinction still remains between the plinth, the body of the building, and the top, which is differential heights and with top floor pavilions and terraces. And this is kind of the journey between, you know, the original concept and a viable development, which, as I said, it taught me a lot. It's 10 years of my career learning about and being engaged in this. So really, this became the starting point from the building to come to life, which in itself was an exciting journey. There's a lot of efficiency and complexity that we try to resolve in plan. So the ground floor is the ground and the first floor are a smaller footprint to give to the city to the building a civic presence towards the city, in terms of having overhangs and canopies and porticos all around the building, or mostly to the front and the back, north and south. This generated an asymmetric core, so a simple fire safety core to the west and the left of the plan, and 6 lift toilet and safety stair and public stair core to the center of the building, which is asymmetrically skewed towards the east, so the right hand side. That allows us for the lift core to serve all the floors, which on the eastern block are one more than the western block. So that kind of took a lot of iteration. It was quite interesting. This is a typical floor. Again, here we achieved quite an efficient plan in terms of ratio between lettable area and landlord area. It's about 86%, if I'm not mistaken. At the same time, this is achieved by being very efficient with the cores and the services and the rises, and without compromising the appearance of the building onto the urban prospect, with these two distinct massing and a sculptural corner that you see here in the plan on the top right. And these two crevasses in the middle of the plan are much more glazed and lined with planters full of plants and greenery that allow this kind of space to, although it's in the shade, it's like a great shadow gap, still a positive and pleasant aspect of the building. And as you can see, the facade towards the inside is very, very simple. Full light glazing with white flush panels, and it's deceptive towards the outside, which is very articulated. So here's some images of how the floor plate existed before tenants took ownership of it and turned it into quite interesting interior designs, I must say. There's a interesting flexibility into the building plan that can be split in various different configurations between 5 tenant units to obviously 1 single tenant unit, which is an interesting aspect of this project as well, which is possibly not the focus of today. And as we move towards the top, the one to last floor is a pavilion, a rooftop pavilion with a terrace on the left-hand side of the picture on the west, while a normal floor on the right. And that allows this kind of duality of space, which is a very glazed, open pavilion on one side that engages with these 2 terraces, one facing full south, very sunny and pleasant, one north, better for summer lunches in the shade. And then the top floor as a similar pavilion only on the eastern block with, again, front and back terrace, in this case, behind the facade to ensure that the proportions of the facade are continuous and logical to the scale of the building. And of course, from up here, there's quite a beautiful view towards the historic city centre of Cambridge and all the spires and the colleges and the King's Chapel. And this is the main aspect, is the north facade onto Station Road. So it's the most prominent urban facade within the development. We can distinctly see the ground floor engagement with a double height porticos, and so a recessed mezzanine, which doesn't need facade articulation, and then the bulk of the building articulated in this case with an iconic stone element to the left here, slightly hidden, a western block that wants to express its height and importance into the height dynamic of the urban progression of Station Road, on the right-hand side that is distinctly subservient, and this space in the middle which kind of allows a polite connection between the 2 stone elements. Another thing that was interesting for us was that a lot of work went into the optimization of the facade, and of course this was driven from a development efficiency, so ultimately maximizing the area without really touching the planning consent. And what we did from these are tender drawings by having a contractor on board, which is with a specialist contractor that dealt with the facade, and the GRC with another subcontractor, was to allow us to really delve into the detail and the layering of this, and in essence, with a marginal change to the perimeter of the building, which is from the top dotted line to the edge of the drawing, create a gain, an important gain on each floor of lettable floor area, which is highlighted here in the green. And this really without changing the concept or the strategy of the facade, but just by working in a positive collaboration between the developer, the designers, obviously the structural designer here had quite an impact, and the contractor and the subcontractor that had to deliver the job. That was for me a very interesting and educational experience and enriching experience. Back to the architectural articulation of it, for us was very important to achieve a kind of an historic presence of this building. You know, we were determined to have a very modern, contemporary approach to the development, while at the same time having a sort of politeness and respect towards the Cambridge heritage. And that to us kind of translated into a material palette, which again had to be economically efficient, of course, simple to erect, because the time of building was obviously a major factor in the process. But you had to respect this kind of soft stoniness that we recognize as a distinct Cambridge look. And so we landed on the use of GRC, glass reinforced concrete, for all the stone facade, we call all the solid facade. And that gave us a lot of control over the tonality of the panels. And we tried to represent it, which is quite tricky, but hopefully these drawings will give you an idea to represent this tonality. So the simple choice we made is that we had a 50% base color and then a 25% darker tonality and a 25% lighter tonality to emphasize this. And then we randomized the position of this to try to mimic the quality of the stone that you find around Cambridge. While it's the undertone and the color base is always the same, obviously it's natural stone, has a lot of variations. We of course had to decode that in a comprehensible construction sequence. So the slight Photoshop tones became very distinct colors. The yellow is cassette zinc panels. The pink is our base GRC color. The red is the darker panel and the blue is the lighter panel. So we really a very restrained amount of materials and colors for all around the building. And here we could start to see the what happens in real life on the picture on the left, and what was highlighted into our drawing on the picture on the right. This is the western side, so the solid here, which is covers the core, the escape core on that facade. But it was a good example to kind of, is the most expansive solid element around the building. So kind of serves as a good example for this point. Then getting a bit on the detail of it, we basically only have 3 fin profiles, which again was something we worked very hard to achieve with our contractors and consultants to ensure the facility of production and a very good control of the production quality by repetition. So all the horizontal are the same all around the building, and there are 3 types of fins. One to the north, which is obviously doesn't have to do much work in terms of solar shading, so it's quite minimal. It was based on our perceived proportions. One to the south, which had to comply with a solar gain ratio, which was much higher. So here the glass and the stone are on a 50-50 percentage. So the fin itself is much wider, but the same depth. And then the east and the west were able to use the same profile. But here, because of the simplicity of it and the control we had over production with the GRC, we were able to install the fins in both directions. This is the same mold, sometimes installed with the chamfer facing north, sometimes with chamfer facing south, and that gave us a lot of flexibility on the rhythm that we could create onto the east and west facades, as you can start to see on the picture on the left. And hopefully you can see more here how basically all this facade is created by 3 elements: the fins, the horizontals, and the solid with a slight extrusion. And we enjoyed exploring this restraint, and we think it's an interesting process to kind of achieve a good gradation of an interesting rhythm, but with using very, very little elements. Then I thought it would be interesting to show you some of the building process, just to highlight that really the building is a very simple onion system, if you wish. The facade went up as a curtain wall with glazed and solid elements. The insulation behind the solid element protrude into the floor space by the same depth as the mulligan. So there was an interesting alignment, which hopefully was easily portrayed in the plans I just showed you. And then once the whole facade bisection, so all the big planes of the facade were complete, these crawling cranes were installed, and they were able to install fins one by one. Each fin is quite heavy, so the first few were quite a challenge for the contractors to learn how to handle them in a time-efficient way, as the project was on a very tight time schedule program. Also, the site was very tight, so the project has been built as 4 buildings that, as they got erected, that tied together. So it was a very interesting and complex construction sequence to ensure that we didn't have to close roads, because obviously near a station it's quite a challenge to occupy public ground for a long period of time. And but the building form with these 2 recesses front and back allowed for crane position to be easily placed and to enable a very interesting construction sequence. So the building was built quite a pace. Here we also see that the corner pieces are another special element of the fins, and we chose to kind of make them protrude from the line of the horizontals to just kind of give an extra rhythm, an extra presence to this kind of corner of this facade. This is the south facade with wider fins and skinnier windows, and we chose this kind of matte, warm gray, dark warm gray color for the aluminium panels that are protruding caps around the windows, as well as the floor marker that you can see in this picture. And this was quite interesting to show as a topping out ceremony happened. Obviously very bad condition, but the building was in an interesting state with a lot of the facade up on one side and basically only the structure on the reverse side. That's because, as I was saying, it was built as if it was 4 different elements of the building independently. And so at any given stage, there was lots of different trades going on in different corners of the site, although the site is in itself not very, very big. So it was an interesting process. And finally, the corner element, which was like a feature wall, and kind of, as I said at the very beginning, an interesting and important piece of our architectural expression of the building, was the last thing to be clad. Kind of, yeah, completed the expression of the building, and it's still a very simple steel structure with a steel substructure that got insulated. It contains quite a lot of risers, so it didn't require to have any window major opening, but at the same time it allowed, with this zinc panel that you see on the right hand side, easy access to the risers behind the stone without the necessity to access or change the stone facade, so to give resilience to the adaptability of the building in the future, which is quite an important factor, of course, for this type of buildings. And this is my last picture, so I hope I did the project justice. It's a project that's dear to me. I think we're very hopeful that it's going to age well, and that our attention to a facade that is at the same time very technological, but very, hybrid between future and tradition, will allow this building to become a loved piece of Cambridge from now on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo, for showing us just how much thought and planning has to go into a project like that. I just remind all of you that if this is making you think of questions, things you'd like to know, please do put them down, hit the button and send in your Q&A, and we will take questions after our final speaker, who is coming up now, who is Daniel Mulligan, Director at Glen Howells Architects.
Probably the most interesting part of this project is the fact that actually we think the English National Ballet have created a new business model for their organisation, And what I mean by that, in the context of post-2008 crash, Arts Council funding being slashed, the ballet went out to figure out ways of raising revenue out of their building. And that's probably one of the fundamental, most interesting parts of this building. And actually, I'll go through this presentation to try and explain how they've done that. The second thing to try and get across is that unlike other organizations like the ballet, they're a touring organization. And actually that's really fundamental in terms of how we've approached this building, how we've designed this building, and how we've organized this building, that the fact that they're a touring organization. The third thing is actually the ballet are not a wealthy organization. And what I mean by that is actually a lot of their money comes from ticket sales and private philanthropy and some Arts Council funding, but they're not a wealthy organization. So the decisions that we've made in this building have echoed the fact that they don't have tons of cash to splurge at this building. And the next thing probably is that, and wrapped around all of those things, is actually this building needs to be an incredibly hard-working building. It's effectively a workshop. It's something where they take your shows back, they explore the shows, they explore the narrative, the design, they twist them, they adapt them. So it's effectively like a workshop for them. So it needs to be a really hard-working building in regards to that. And the final thing is actually, and very importantly, it's where they previously were in Kensington, the ballet were effectively down a side street Mews. Where they are now, they're at the head of a square in a whole new community. So they're effectively now the core building, the core organization in this new community. So I think that's a really, really amplified position to where they were, and they've taken that really seriously, and they want to be that outward looking organization to that new community. A little bit about the history of the English National Ballet. So they were started in 1950 by the great English dancers Alicia Markova and Anton Dolan. And this was really in that post-war 50s era when a lot of the institutions were very much London-centric. And the brief was quite simple. How could you take ballet from London into the regions? So that's effectively the origins of what they are as a touring organization. How can you take ballet to regions that don't normally get ballet? So that's the core essence of what the ballet are about. Then in 1977, something quite fundamental happened, in that somebody donated a building in Kensington to them. So that was in terms of Markova House, which was previously the Royal College of Music. And effectively that was I described it as a make-do and mend building. It was an old Victorian muse building that they carved up, and they made studios out of it, and they made dance rehearsal space out of it and training areas out of it. So it's something which they loved, and it was with them for a long, long time, over 50 years, but it was never built with ballet in mind. So effectively, the opportunity came to them to pivot from selling this position, selling this building in Kensington, taking that, and then effectively designing a whole new building in East London, which is fit for purpose. So that's quite a fundamental move. The next thing within that was their ambition. So the previous building, whilst it was much loved, to a certain degree it constrained their ambition. It had a couple of rehearsal studios. It had limited training space, limited rehab space. So what they needed was something which matched what the best dance facilities in the world had to allow them to be more ambitious in the future. So from that, they wanted something which actually had much more rehearsal spaces, a production studio, rehab spaces, and gym spaces. But on top of that, because they're a touring organization and they're out on the road for roughly 6 months a year, they effectively had a large portion of their building which was empty. So could they rent out those empty rooms whilst they're on tour to generate their income whilst they're away? So that was almost the biggest pivot they could make. Thinking about their building laterally like that allowed them to bring revenue from new sources into their organization to help support them for the next 100 years. So that's quite a critical thing. The next thing is they wanted a building which opened out to the community. So where they were in Kensington was tucked away down a Mews Street, and dare I say, unless you knew they were there, you wouldn't find them. By being front and central in this whole new community by Canning Town Station in East London, they could be that outreach. They could be that person who actually shows to people who don't normally see ballet what ballet's around. So having a building which is designed around bringing people into it, showing them around it, letting them see the ballet happening, and actually encouraging them to join in was fundamental to their goal. The next thing about the English National Ballet was that they're effectively two organizations. obviously the adult portion, which is the English National Ballet, but the school portion as well, which is called the English National Ballet School. So the next idea is about bringing these two organisations who were in separate parts of London, obviously Kensington for one and Chelsea for the other, and bring them together, effectively creating this cross-fertilisation, or this academy programme where the young guys could see what the older guys are doing, and you get better professionals off the back of it. And the final one, and this is very much generated from Tamara Rojo, the artistic director, was to try and create a Bauhaus for dance. And what she meant by that is not just having a building which is about dance, but a building which engages with other arts, like sculptors, like artists, like other theatrical groups, bringing them into this building to cross-fertilize, to learn from each other, to generate new ideas, and actually have something which is world-class, and actually they can bring bigger and bolder, more ambitious shows out to the public. So they're the kind of the core ambitions of what the ballet are around. But matched alongside that was trying to get a partner or a development partner who could sit with them to go through that process. And in this case, it was Equal World Ballymore, who obviously owned the site, but had developed all the residential buildings around the site. And they were so keen to get this arts organisation into their community, because they knew that once you get someone like the English National Ballet with that name and that history behind them, actually smaller creative organisations would follow. And off the back of that, the London Film School are coming there. There's a bunch of art galleries coming there, and other creative industries moving there. So what this has done, it's created this new creative hub in this part of East London, which wasn't really there before. And I think that's a really, really positive move. And what that starts to do then is it connects down to Trinity Boy Wharf just south of this, to connect in with another creative hub which is there. So you start to create this part of East London, which is all about creativity on the ground floor, which I think is a really, really strong story. And then linking to that, and how they achieved that was they actually had a development already, which was this series of multicolored brick buildings around a perimeter of an island. And in the middle of this building, which you see in the image to the left-hand side, is the gem-like building that actually we've designed for the ballet in the middle of that. So we describe it as the pearl within the oyster. You have this delicate, lightweight, glowing box surrounded by this crust of heavyweight residential buildings. And then on the ground floor of this, you have a mixture of creative organizations with food and beverage and shops and cafes, and all the things which will facilitate effectively new town. And I think that's something really, really powerful about that, getting that right development partner who shares your vision with that. So from that position, they then generated the brief. And the brief was, dare I say, is incredibly ambitious. They effectively went around the world, and we went around the world with them to see who's done it best in which countries. And that led us to North America, to Canada, to Germany, to France, and around the UK to see what the best types of buildings like this have done, and actually how we could learn from them to make our building hopefully better. So off the back of that, we started with the Colosseum, which Tamara felt was the best stage house to do ballet in the world. So effectively from that position, we mimicked their 18 by 22 meter size stage house onto our building. In addition with this, we put a series of bleacher seats to the back of that space so that they could open those bleacher seats out to bring schools and local community uses into the building to see dress rehearsals before they went out on tour. So that tied in very much to the ethos and the soul of what the ballet is about. The next thing we did was it got 7 15 by 15 meter studios located all the way around the perimeter of this building, which allowed them a huge amount more, over quadruple the amount of space they would have to practice on. So effectively they could be working on multiple parts of their show at the same time, making them more efficient, but also just better at what they do. Because they're a touring organization, they needed to have space to unload and load their sets before they went out on tour. So having a large loading bay for them to back their articulated lorries onto and connect onto the back of the building to bring the work on show, which is very unique to this building, but it's something we had to do. On top of that, we brought in lots of wardrobe space, much more than what they have at the moment, so they could produce their work, but also work for other people in London. So again, making the money whilst they were on road. And actually things like having the best sports science facilities, space for sports staff, bringing the school into the building, and ensuring the building's future-proof, that actually this will last for 100 years beyond this, and it can be adapted across time. So that was the ambitious brief that the Ballet had. And actually what they needed to do was try to fit that in to quite an awkward shape. And what you see in the plan there, or on the page there, is effectively one of the sketch plans we had quite early on in the scheme. And what you see there in terms of the cutout bits of paper was Tamara Rojo collaborating with us over the weekend, trying to kind of figure out ways to get the things she wanted into this building. So that collaboration process right from the beginning with Tamara in particular was absolutely critical. Luckily for us, she's got an incredibly dynamic and creative eye. She could understand the complexity of the building, easily put them together in 3 dimension, and actually she's the type of dream client you want with a project like this, of this complexity. That got us to a position where we refined that diagram around what you see here, which is basically 7 studios wrapped around the bottom side of that page there, with then circulation dotted in red, which links you off of that. So really taking quite an awkward shape. First of all, putting in the big studio spaces, and from that position, the leftover spaces then became back of house areas, gym areas, health facilities that could be manipulated more easily into these slightly awkward spaces. And then this all came together as a series of plans, which is what you start to see there, which is effectively that very, very complex brief of quite large volumes being nestled in around a centralized production studio right in the middle of that space there. And I'll get to the production studio in a few minutes because it's actually very, very important and very much the heart of this building. And the section was just as important as this. And actually, Tamara quite early in the process realized that actually because you have effectively 6 meter high floor to floors for the studios, you can get effectively a free floor as a mezzanine floor in between that, where it's not a studio. So the back of house areas might be 2 sets of toilets stacked up on top of each other, 2 sets of classrooms stacked up on each other, or things like that. So the spaces that don't need a 6 meter height, double up in height in volume behind these spaces. So actually really trying to sweat the plan and the section to get the most volume, most area at its volume was very, very key to the ballet. Onto the production studio, which I said was key to this space. And why that's so important was, as a touring organization, just before the ballet would go out and tour, they would have to rent something like the Coliseum for a week so they could practice their show in effectively a dress rehearsal before they went out on the road. And you can imagine to rent out the Coliseum is quite an expensive thing to do for a week. So what this allowed them to do was effectively bring that week of dress rehearsal and stage manufacture in-house, and therefore not suffer those costs. So it's a really, really powerful thing. But beyond that, what it did was it allowed other people to rent this space from them when they're out on tour, and became a huge income generator for the ballet whilst they were on tour. In terms of the space dynamics, as I said before, Tamara said the Coliseum was her favorite and the best stage house that she's worked in. So effectively, we've mimicked the stage house of that. So it's an 18 by 22 meter wide plan. It's a 26 meter high space with a single purchase flying rig within that. And that mimics the best theatre houses that they go to around the world. So that was really, really important for her and for them to get in. And this then shows how actually they've gone to the nth degree of actually mimicking the hemp ropes and the flying rigs, so they can actually, like for like, capture how it'll be on the road when they do their shows. So actually getting that in to the building was actually getting the beating heart into this building. And this then all ties together into this diagram, which is what you see here, which is the studios, and on the first floor, the workspaces, where you see the workstations there, into the spiral staircase, which runs through the heart of the building. And that spiral staircase was really important because actually what that allowed us to do was take people in off the ground floor, which is on the bottom left of this building here, in through that spiral staircase and up through the building, and allow people from the public to move up through this building. So effectively seeing through those little porthole windows into the studios. So effectively allowing people in the public to see the ballet being practiced and performed before it went out and tour. And that was a really, really important aspect to what the ballet wanted. They wanted to make their art public and visible. So actually allowing those portholes and those viewing windows into the spaces was very, very important to them. Equally important to that was then how you wrap the building. And relative to this presentation, I think this is important because whilst the internals of the building was very much dictated by the program of what they were doing, the facade really was about how you dress the building to match the aspiration of how the ballet wanted to show themselves to the world, how they want to describe themselves to the world. So they'd come from a Victorian Muse building in Kensington, which was a lovely building, to something which is much more overt and out there in this new site, in this new part of London. So how would the cladding, how would the elevations of this building describe their statement of intent, and how do they want to show themselves to the world? In this case, we have this philosophy, or this idea of light silhouette and backdrop, in that we wanted a building which would illuminate, and that when you're in Canning Town station, you could see it from the station and would act like this lighthouse drawing you towards it. The idea of silhouette was that wouldn't it be lovely to see the silhouettes of the dancers behind the glass? So when you're in that front square, you can see the movement of people, and this facade becomes a very dynamic facade. And backdrop, actually, that behaves as this piece of wallpaper, or this backdrop to the square that you might be able to project things onto when there's festivals in the square, or as this dynamic backdrop to the square in terms of the silhouettes moving onto it. So they were kind of the basis of the narrative for the facade. And that got us thinking about this idea of a dual building, a building which had two aspects, a daytime aspect and a nighttime aspect. And the daytime aspect would be a very simple, passive building, which actually was elegant and it didn't try too hard. But then at nighttime, when it illuminates, it becomes this light box where you see the silhouette through it, and it becomes something quite dynamic and quite interesting, and almost like a beacon in the middle of this building doing that job. So effectively being that cornerstone, that square where a church might have been 100 years ago. And then materials, in terms of how we got to that position, was this very, very simple choice of linnet engineering glass, which is the translucent glass to the left-hand side of the photograph, followed by either Schueco or Schueco Janssen glazing, which is the large planar piece of glazing there. And because this was read as such a simple building, in contrast to the more complex, heavyweight residential buildings beside it, this needed to do a job where actually less was more, that it stripped all the elements down, and it was about simplicity. So for example, on the image in the right-hand side there, where you have the Schuko Janssen Viz system specified, was important that in the 6 meter high span, we didn't have a 3 meter transom going through the middle of this, which you would have done if you used the standard aluminium versions of it. So simple things like that became really, really important to us. But to achieve that aesthetic as well, we had to get the frames from Austria, and then we had to get the glass from a high altitude factory in Spain in order to get the glass to read as perfectly flat glass, and the frames obviously to not buckle with the weight. In addition to that, with the linnet glazing, it's the tallest piece of linnet glazing in Europe. And in order to achieve that, we had to get mid-support dowels to allow for the loading on that. So effectively, the simplicity of this glazing system of this building has got tons of engineering behind it to achieve this. So that became the important thing with that. And added with that was a case of actually trying to get the environmental engineering to work just right. So actually the thing didn't overheat in summertime and leak heat during the winter time. So all these things added together became the trick, which is what this building did. On the linnet glass, in order to have something which could glow at night time from the northern square, what we did was found a translucent insulation that we could put between the sandwich panel of the linnet glass that would let light through and let the silhouettes of the dancers through. However, it would give it a really, really high U value. So that was really, really important to us and to the ballet. And in addition to that, having glass, as I said before, on the large bits of planar glazing, which could go beyond 6 meters in high, but actually look like they're almost not there, was really important. So effectively getting that level of minimalism and that level of detailing in was a real challenge for this building. That then combines itself with some of the internal componentry, for example, the double T bridge beams, which is the concrete bridge beams which span the studios, the jack-up slabs for the dancers, but also the dance floor on top of that. And on top of that, the biodiversity on top of the building, which is in the form of the green roof here. So having all those elements tying together became the challenge of this building. This then got us to working with a company called NA Curtain Walling, who not only have been a subcontractor, but really a partner on this building in terms of getting into the nitty gritty of these detailings, understanding the vision of what we're trying to achieve, and actually working up through the details in this. And they've been great in terms of working with us and collaborating with us and getting something which actually achieves what the vision was. And this is an example of those large scale, 6 meter high upper windows. And then even just down to simple things like the corner details on the ground floor and getting that glass corner where the glass oversails the corner, so that the corner's red is almost not there. So the trick or the skill with this building is not seeing the detail. It's what's been removed and actually not having it look like it's over engineered. So that's where we feel the simplicity and the skill of this building is. That tied in with the sustainability. Effectively, the concrete has used 50% GGBS in order to decarbonize it. Obviously, we got high performance insulation, high performance roof insulation in this building in order to bring the EU values down. A high degree of air tightness in order to stop the space from leaking. But on top of that, actually, by introducing a philosophy of sealing from mechanical engineering the dance spaces, because actually that's the best solution for the dancers in order to have that constant steady temperature, but allowing the office spaces then and the classroom spaces to open up and having natural ventilation. So having something which does both, and it's not a one-stop solution. It's something which can do different jobs for different spaces for different people. And what we're left with then is for the 200 support staff is that in the hottest days of summer, like a traditional office, you can open the window and let the air in, and actually it becomes a much more dynamic and interesting space, but also much more sustainable space, we feel. In terms of the internal concrete, this building, again, is something which is about simplicity and stripping it back. So one of the things which this building had to do, it obviously had to span long distances in order to get those dance floors to work. In some cases, it was 50 meters, in other cases, it was 80 meters. And we studied a number of options for this. We studied wood, we studied steel, and we studied concrete. But effectively, we ended up on a concrete solution because effectively, when you have 70 dancers mid-span jumping up and down a space, a long span space, you need to have something which absorbs all of that energy, and concrete was the correct solution for that. So then it was a case of having that concrete to be decarbonized using GGBS as that core principle, and that became one of the key backbones of this project. But on top of that, we wanted to keep the concrete raw. We didn't have a huge budget, and we felt that actually this material, this product was too interesting to hide away. So actually by having that as part of the internal story was key to us. And then it became about knitting the M&E equipment in between the double T flanges to have that very, very simple sequence of spaces that actually read as they are. And this is how it turned out. These two images here are of the entrance foyer here. What you're seeing is the double T beams exposed, and every other flange has got M&E ducting or acoustic insulation wrapped into it. And actually that allows us to have this building perfectly coordinated so that actually all that other stuff that you normally hide away is invisible. This then shows a picture of all the components together, the concrete beams, the linen glass, and the Schueco Janssen Viz system glass on the left-hand side there, all together. And I think for us, the real success of this is actually is how simple it looks and how effortless it looks. But all the architects looking at this will realize actually it's that simplicity which is where the skill is. By having it look effortless has taken a lot of work. And I think that's the key thing with this space actually. It's how simple and how effortless it's looked has taken a lot of work to get there. But then the spaces within the building, for example, the costume atelier, which actually we don't want to do that with. We want to actually express the complexity and embrace the mess, dare I say. And actually by letting those spaces be what they are becomes part of the interesting part of this building. Actually, there is spaces which are messy, and there is places which are very, very, very minimal. And then on top of that, you have very, very peculiar and unusual aspects of the dancers themselves. So the bottom middle image there starts to show effectively the stretching pit for the dancers, and having a space which got tatami mats in it, which has got acoustic insulation on the ground and the softest space, create a very, very tranquil stretching space, which you get all the dancers stretching on a regular basis, and actually becomes very much a symptom of what this building's about. The final space I want to talk about is probably the foyer space. And actually, I've touched on this before, and it's quite key to this building and how the ballet wanted to describe themselves to the greater public. they always wanted this building to be something which engaged with the people, not just from London City Island, but also Canning Town and East London in general. So they want to have a building that you could walk in from the public with your kids and actually show your kids the ballet and what they do. So this spiral staircase being an inviting and encouraging space which draws you up was really, really important. We deliberately made it 2 meters wide. So actually it has that kind of more processional route, but also it allowed for the incidental stops on the square to meet on the stairs to meet your friends and have a chat. So it encouraged people to stop and talk. It also encouraged people to move up it. So you use this vertical circulation rather than the lifts to the left-hand side of it. And it also had vision windows of it that get views into the various studios. And that was really, really important to us. On the left-hand side, you start to see one of those vision windows where she actually starts to give you this glimpse into the studios from the staircase. And that really is about allowing people from the public to see what the ballet are doing and see what it's about. So trying to demystify this art as much as they possibly can, but also try to allow for informal meetings and actually also within all of that, try to create this E&B family that everybody meets together on this staircase. And then that kind of ties into this broader vision that the ballet have about this being this inclusive organization. So they've obviously benefited from the Mayor's Good Growth Fund, but they've done that through their outreach process. They've got processes, for example, Dances with Parkinson's and other outreach programs, which try to bring dance to places which dance haven't gotten to in the past and to broaden their spectrum of what they do further than they are at the moment. So that was really, really important to what the ballet are around. And then just in terms of successes to date, I think probably the most important success to date, I would say, is they've managed to keep going through the pandemic. And when you consider how they've done that by being able to rent out certain rooms that they have whilst they're not using them. So that's been a really, really strong generator of income whilst we're in this current lockdown. They've also managed to not rent out space they don't need to practice their art. So effectively saving the money they have got. So probably the biggest success I would say they've had to date, amongst all the other successes, is that this building has done what they set out to do, in that it's made them financially secure in probably the hardest time in their 70-year period. On top of that, they're reaching 72,000 people a year in terms of their outreach program, in terms of going out and seeing people around the country. And they're also attracting other major people like the V&A and Sadler's Wells to move to East London as well. So they've become this kind of, this frontiersman who's out there, first of all, showing what other arts organizations can do and showing them how to do it. And this is then it in its totality. I think probably for us, what's most pleasing about this building is actually its simplicity in the overall island. It's effectively, we describe it as this pearl in the oyster, and it has that delicacy to it, that actually all the buildings around it are big, heavy masonry building. And this one sits as this counterbalance to all of that, this delicate, unique building, which actually floats above the ground and actually has this kind of mysticism to it, where actually you want to know what's going on inside the rooms. You can see the silhouettes, you can see inside of it, and it draws you in. I think what's also interesting is that it's a building which is incredibly cost effective. It's lean and it's raw, and actually when you walk into it, like when you walk into the best Victorian railway stations, you can understand how the building's been built and what it's doing. So I think they're, for me, the biggest takeaways from it, and that's what I'm most proud about it.
Thank you very much, Daniel. That was fantastic. I loved your phrase, the beating heart. And although I think you were using that for the main space in the building, it does feel as if the whole thing is the beating heart of the community. It's not just me who loved it. Somebody out there in the audience says, what a superb, deeply considered building. And I have to say, there are lovely comments that have come in on all the presentations, and everybody who sent in questions. They're just great questions. It's great to see that you're so involved. So I was going to start with a couple of questions which seem to have a common theme for all three presentations, and they're really to do with the amount of thought that went in before the project. On the dance centre, somebody said, very challenging site shape. How long did you spend on the early design phase? On Station Road, someone said, do you think the delays to planning made the final scheme much better than the earlier schemes. And there's a question on the Fratry as well, about the fact that the first scheme that you put forward was not completely loved and you developed into something else. And do you actually think that's a better building than you would have gone with otherwise? So I'll start that with Ingrid and then move it on to the other two.
Yes, of course. I think it did develop to something better. I think the first images of the scheme were done within kind of the 3 first months of the kind of process since competition. It was just done for funding, for the first Heritage Lottery funding round. So I don't think we were particularly happy with the expression of the elevation. So it was interesting to see that kind of even the locals weren't so convinced by it. And I think the process of rereading the site and reworking the elevations was actually a really successful process for the project.
Daniel.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for the comments. I break it down into 3 things really in terms of the development of this. Probably the first one was just being open and seeing how other professionals, other colleagues have done similar buildings around the world for about a 2 to 3 week period with the ballet was the first really important thing with this. Because, you know, none of us are building in a vacuum. We're all learning from other great architects out there and actually going out there and researching and understanding both the good and the bad, you know, what's worked, what hasn't worked. And doing that with the ballet really kind of crystallined their understanding of what they wanted and what they didn't want. Examples of that would be a much larger atelier. I spoke before about the large studios, things like that, which were critical to them. That then get us down to the second period, which was 2 months of intensive design, weekly design sessions with the ballet, where we would go to them every week with a whole new set of plans, which reacted to the last session's comments. And why that was so important is because they're out on tour for large periods of time. So you have to work with their calendar. You have to kind of capture their window when they're in London and can talk to us. So that 2 month period actually got under the belly to an awful lot of the kind of the big ticket items of how we were going to arrange that building. And Tamara obviously was critical to that. But another chap from the ballet, Al Ritchie's, who was our technical director, was critical to that as well. And those two together understood how they wanted this building to work. That then got us to the kind of the broader, more marathon phase, where you're just trying to kind of chip away at the block of stone, and you're kind of constantly working with the constraints and all lots of stuff to unveil what this building is going to be. And I'm sure the other colleagues on the phone, Paolo and Ingrid, are the same, that you never know everything. You kind of arrive at problems and constraints and whatever it might be. And Paolo talked about the planning constraints and things like that with his project, that these things then start to inform challenges, which then refine the process longer. And that's then the remaining 5 years is that. But the first initial phase to get that core ingredients was probably about 3 months, I would say.
Thank you. And Paolo.
Well, I think we're very happy with where we got to at the end. And it's, you know, there is an equal measure of, I think we could have been happy at other points of the process, but we kind of have to take it at face value. Having a bit more time granted by a planning sequence to digest constraints and work with them and make sure that the building has the right presence for not only your direct client, but also for a wide number of stakeholders, I think that's a very good thing. Often if you have no constraints and no barriers, you just have to go with the first thing that comes to mind and work with that. Well, like this, I mean, in our particular case, it was a very long period, so I wouldn't advise that that's the right amount of time, but something in between, a fast track and a 10 years, it would be good.
Okay, well, thank you. Yes, no more really stretched out projects. The other thing that a lot of people seem to ask about is related to facades and related to thermal performance and insulation. So Paolo, for example, there were questions about the BREEAM rating, about how you actually achieve the thermal performance and where you put the insulation. And someone did say, could you explain the facade in more detail? I don't think we've got time to go into a really detailed examination of it. But similarly for Daniel, there were questions about how you balanced thermal performance with the translucency that you wanted to have in your building. But perhaps I'll come back to you, Paolo, first.
Sure. So I think the building's been rated BREEAM Excellent, and the way we achieved that, well, it was obviously a combination of elements, but specifically on the facade was to have a careful balance between glass performance and solid and glazing, especially on the south-facing facade. So the south-facing facade, I think, is a 55% solid facade, although it looks very glazed. And we managed to keep this full height glazing by reducing the general surface and using protective glass. So that was something again that became part of the design, but the reflectivity of the glass thought worked well for performance and for the look of the building that didn't look so out of context. And that was
Thank you.
Specifically in the facade.
And Daniel?
Yeah, you've seen from our photographs that one of the key aspirations that we have for this building was this kind of glowing box design, if you like. And obviously, if you do that on all four sides, it's going to leak heat and not perform very well. So really, at the beginning of this process, we need to get to a position of, okay, which bits were important, which bits weren't, in terms of that glowing box thing. And obviously, the bit onto the northern square was the important bit with that. You can then see the building's got this kind of strange trapezoidal shape to it. So it kind of gave us effectively a good edge to stop the building from being the translucent portion onto the square, and then return into being the much more higher performance insulation around the side street to the side of it. So effectively what that meant is that we had about a third of this building which was translucent facing onto the square, which is the northern square, so didn't suffer from overheating, and all the rest of the building is then a high performance insulation which then allows it to achieve the U values and the performance that it needs to.
Thank you. Actually, I was going to ask you something about the lighting. I haven't seen the building. I've only seen the photographs. But it seems when you look at the photographs that's those translucent areas, as if you get two very different colours of lighting coming through. Is that deliberate?
Yeah, there's just inside from the lighting internally, we have these lighting tracks both built into the floor, but also built into the head detail of the section. So effectively, we have a light shining down and a light shining up, and those lights are then, I think it's RGB. I probably pronounced that wrong or said that wrong, but they allow you to change the tone of that light as you would want to. So, for example, if it's St. Patrick's Day, you can paint it green.
Okay. And Ingrid, we had questions coming in for you about the process of material design, particularly the selection of the stone, how you selected it and how you designed the arches. I'm guessing this was all new for you, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first kind of conservation or historic project for Feilden Fowles. So it was really new to kind of work with historic England, the Victorian Society, CFC, and so on. So as I said before, there was a lot of design development for the language of the elevation through kind of drawings, physical model making, 3D model making to kind of get the sculptural form of the arch and the rectilinear frame. We then kind of looked at different materials. We did explore precast concrete for a brief moment before kind of returning to stone because obviously of its natural quality, its weathering. To choose the stone, we first looked at the precinct. We looked at the stones that have been used around the building. So on the cathedral and surrounding buildings. There's a range of, I think, 5 stones that have been used over the years for repairs and so on. So we visited all the quarries, looked at the stone properties in terms of their performance, their porosity, but also in terms of their texture, their color, and the available bed heights, because it was really key for us to get quite large stone to ensure that there wouldn't be too many kind of joints in the elevation. When we started on site, we had narrowed down, I think, the stone selection to 3 stones, and we started to get some one-to-one prototyping that led us to decide on a stone called Docker bricks. The reason why we chose this stone was because of its color, which is complementary to the rest of the buildings, but also because it's got a quite faint texture, some black veins kind of running alongside the beds, the bedding planes. We thought that was an interesting feature that kind of radiates around the arch.
And I think my last question, which has just come in, is someone said, I'm intrigued with the level of articulation in the Fratry, which was achieved on the exterior, was considered in the interior and purposely avoided. And lest you think that's a criticism, they then finished wonderful project.
Thanks. It was really kind of difficult to judge the amount of relief or ornamentation on the inside of the building. There's a lot of debate about how sculpted the inside should be. We ended up keeping it quite simple, actually, because we felt it would compete too much with the external elevation, plus the external elevation with the stone and the kind of way it's been cut. It's so wonderful that it would have been difficult to kind of make it justice to the inside. So we kind of kept the walls quite simple, and they're rendered in lime plaster, which is pigmented to match the stone. So from the inside, it kind of appears almost like the columns are kind of almost stone coming in.
Thank you. Well, I've just had a question in for Daniel, which I don't think you'll be able to answer. Will you be lighting the building green in 2 weeks' time? I guess you don't know the answer to that, do you?
I suspect they kind of have to, don't they? After I just said that.
Yeah, I think they have to. So you tell them. I think we've had some really fantastic questions in response to our really fantastic presentations. There have been some more detailed questions about drips and dealing with pigeons, and there's obviously you're all hungry to know more about these projects. I think however much one hears in detail, it only piques one's appetite to know even more. So I'm sure that some of the questions can be passed on to our speakers if they are happy to answer them in more detail. But I'm going to pull this part to an end. There's a couple more things still to show you and tell you about. But I'm very grateful to all our speakers, and I would like to thank you all very much indeed. We're now inviting entries for the 2021 Schueco Excellence Awards. Now in their 8th year, the awards showcase the very best contributions from design teams and the Schueco facade, window and door systems involved. Entries will be judged on creativity, innovation, technical expertise and collaboration to deliver architectural intent. This year's judging panel will be chaired by Architecture Today editor Isabel Allen, and includes 2 of today's speakers, Ingrid Petit and Daniel Mulligan, as well as Carol Patterson from OMA, Steve Moody from A Linear Consulting, Harry Montresor from Montresor Partnership, and Hazel Joseph from AHMM. The deadline for entries is the 25th of June, and winners will be announced at the awards lunch hosted by Charlie Luxton, which will be on the 16th of September at the Banqueting House in London's Whitehall. An award supplement will be published in Architecture Today and also in a special feature online. So to enter the awards, visit www.architecturettoday.co.uk/Schueco-awards-2021. And finally, don't forget the launch of Innovation Now, iNow, a dramatic online format to introduce Schueco's latest product and innovations. The iNow launch event is on Wednesday, the 24th of March at 10:30 a.m. For more information about this and to register, go to www.schueco, which is spelt SCHUECO.com/UK/I now, spelt letter INOW. And we will also add the links we've mentioned to our follow-up email, which will come with the webinar replay details later today. Thank you for watching.